Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. I have Elizabeth Edwards here. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, great to be here today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a serious fangirl of yours because you do science-based marketing. And just so everybody knows, Elizabeth is the founder of Volume PR, which she started 20 years ago, and also has the Engagement Science Lab and a couple other exciting projects we'll talk about. But yeah, thank you for joining us, Elizabeth.
It's great to be here, Amy. I love talking to you whenever we can.
Thank you. Well, so tell me, first of all about, science-based marketing and the psychology of the human mind and how you kind of look at communications through that lens.
That is my favorite topic to talk about. One of them for sure.
Let's go.
So I think the easiest way to intro to this and explain is that when I began studying communication, I wanted to major in psychological communication in college. It just has always seemed the most fascinating to me that if we want to be successful as communicators, to approach that from the perspective of how the mind creates meaning, the psychology of understanding and change. And I was existentially frustrated in college to learn that that is not a field of study. And here we are some 20-something years later, and it still isn't. But what I did throughout the 20 years that I've now owned Volume PR is my team and I studied that science. We combined the fields that we look at, what we call behavioral science and neurosciences. So it's psychology, sociology, anthropology. It's everything that is the science fields of you and me and how our minds work. And it's been one of the most fascinating periods in history these last 20 years with the explosion of insights because of where we are at this moment in time with technology, the capabilities that research laboratories and scientists have to study the mind and to study how we engage with words and how the mind forms meaning. We've just had an explosion of insights in that field these last 20 years while my team and I have been paying attention and testing what we read in these journals that is applicable to the work of a public relations and strategic integrated communications professional and applying that at Volume PR as a real world lab. Volume was founded in 2001. We do a lot of work with enterprises and technology startups and B2B and what we call complex consumer issues. So my team and I spend a lot of time on how do we message this so that you don't just get it, but you get someone to go from that look of that kind of screwed up look on their face of like, all right, I'm tracking with you, but this is complicated, to how do we more quickly help an audience evolve to nodding and saying, yeah, I understand. I'm with you. I'm tracking. And we've used Volume as a lab for the past 20 years to test what we've been reading in these journals and how to apply that and put it together into a system of more effective engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you were saying it's different. It's not necessarily about coming at an audience by automatically saying we're going to try and change your mind or change your behavior. It's more about coming from a place of understanding. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The way that we describe it is engaging our audience from the frequency of understanding. Mm-hmm. It's not that I'm going to try to put together a slick ClickFunnels website that slaps in a social proof and then a scarcity message and a you better act fast and then throws a timer on the page and all these ways that you can take tidbits from the science and game them in marketing to create an increased outcome. And we see it with these courses and things that are for sale that use a lot of those different tactics. And I know I'm not the only one who interacts with those and feels sleazy, feels manipulated. And when we use the science outside of the context of how I'm changing myself the locus of control is in the wrong place, right? They're trying to use the science to game you, Amy. And what I want to challenge us to do is study the science to learn how do we change how we communicate so that we are more engaging people from a frequency of understanding. Of I know that your mind is more likely to understand something, or I am more understandable if I say it using certain techniques, or if I present this message using certain science. Mm-hmm. So that's what we are focused on doing now.
Yeah. And it's also complicated because I learned from your article, I'll just say, on the mask messaging. So you wrote this article, it's on Medium. We'll share it with our audience. I think you wrote it 8 months ago, but it definitely still applies today because we're still having mask fights regarding coronavirus. And you said, as scientists know, that science changes. So the issue also is how do you think about that? And even just using the mask debacle as an example, what could have Fauci done? What could he said? What should he have said in the beginning to not have these fights right now that we're currently having, like in airports and whatnot? And so then I guess it's a two-part question. Maybe we could just talk about the mask as an example, but then also how do you go about this as a communicator when science might change and just in general not thinking about the changing of science, just what's your framework for starting with a new client or project?
Yeah, so that brings me to a couple things I want to say on the Fauci side in that article. What I think is really interesting for us to study there as communicators is the importance of recognizing something that in behavioral and cognitive sciences we call the backfire effect. So there's all these different effects, phenomena, theories, and whatnot that we measure in the mind and know from this psychological behavioral perspective what they create in people. But yet we don't teach this and apply this over in the communications world or teach it to our leaders and the scientists who are holding the microphone. And so the article you're talking about, I think, of course, I'm biased because I wrote it, but it is a long read that was intended to, at that moment in time, give everybody, and it should apply for forever, a moment of why did things go so horribly wrong in spinning off into guaranteeing that there would be a mask debate. And it is because Fauci, at the very first time he talked about masks, he did something that violates what we call backfire effect. He did something that made it for sure that he could never go back and change that statement. And at a time when people are in heightened mode of crisis, we know the brain especially, it doesn't like change. And if you say one thing in an extreme of this is what it for sure is, no question about it, it is this, you make that kind of statement, you don't leave room for your audience to be prepared that things may evolve. And he made a very closed-ended, extreme statement that per the laws of backfire effect, we know you will then cause backfire if you ever go against those words. And so that's part of what happened. But the rest of the article kind of dissects and is meant to give us really some tools of how to understand how would I communicate differently based off of what went wrong with mask messaging from day one.
Mm-hmm. I guess the only hard thing is that I read from you that the human brain can only handle so much, which is definitely true in my case, right? And so humans love to have just definites. And especially me, when I'm talking to a doctor about my kid or whatever, it's like, yes or no. Like, please just tell me. And they'll give me a direct, like, yes, no. And it's like, that's all I can handle. Thank you very much. And so I think possibly, I'm not sure, Dr. Fauci was trying to help us with that kind of side of our brain. Well, not that I don't think anyone really thought this through at the time because we were all in crisis. And it's interesting to think about if he had communications help ahead of time. But, that yes or no was possibly helpful and comforting to human beings at that time. And so when you kind of add in the aside, like, well, we're still studying this, or we don't really know, that's where people get irritated and we don't find comfort in that. So, I mean, who knows? We could talk about that forever.
Absolutely true. But, I think where it applies for us so much, Amy, is in crisis communication, especially, you asked about kind of the services and how we put this into helping folks. And this has a lot of applicability when we are creating messaging or media training spokespeople in times of crisis, of exactly how do you say that so as to lessen the likelihood of triggering a worldwide debate if you're in someone's seat, such as Fauci and a leader in that capacity. Thankfully, most of us, the stakes are not that high, right? But still, whatever it may be for your business, it is everything in your world. So it's important that we know, how to make statements declaratively to the mind, but how to couch them and frame them so that even in a time of crisis, when we want to cling to definitives, we don't believe that they are never going to change. And so there's a lot of, I think we talk about in the article, saying with what we know today, these things may change, stay tuned, but we've got you. We're figuring this out. We're on it. And continuing with some of that at that stage would have been more the direction to go than any kind of definitives, because as you were saying, the sciencey term for the brain can only take in so much, right? We get exhausted, is called cognitive overload or cognitive fatigue. Right? Our brains are just tired. Think of it as juggling, right? You can only juggle so much information, and certain people can juggle more than others. I'm gonna guess, our Nobel Prize winners out there, they can juggle a lot more balls than the average person can juggle, right? They have more cognitive ability. So we all have different cognitive ability levels and can handle different levels of information. And now that we see these post-COVID studies, it's really interesting that it's really that exactly that is what that cognitive overload feeling is, why people just shut down and don't take in new information.
Yeah. And then as you're talking, honestly, it would be better not to have a definitive in that situation, where then if we could have, abated these fights, that would have been better. Right. So just, having a more non-decisive communication is better than now people not wearing masks or having fights in airports, because I was at an airport yesterday and I saw one, like not physical, but it was like, oh yeah, this is going to get heated. So it's like, I don't think it was worth it, but, for Fauci to give that definitive. But anyway, so tell us about your framework. And again, so guys, we're going to get really interesting in this conversation because we are going to talk about some personal stuff that, Elizabeth has, taken to her own life in terms of, looking at the science and using it on herself for once, rather than giving all of her knowledge to her clients, as we do in PR. We're going to talk about that. And it's super cool and, motivating, actually. But first, just tell us, what is your framework for working with clients in this way?
So our framework, we have two approaches, essentially. Volume PR is that done-for-you agency. We're a full-service strategic integrated comms and PR agency. So you need messaging, launching products, media training companies, everything in that world of integrated comms. We do that for you and our consultants through that. But then we had Engagement Science Lab. We added that to our brand portfolio in 2018. It's where we focus on training and research. So obviously there's a lot of research involved in all this, but our clients tend to be the kind of clients that really like research as well. So we're helping them with moving into the new age of what we call non-conscious research, more evolved forms of research. If you think about, a lot of times in PR, we use focus groups, or marketing and advertising. Focus groups are heavily relied on. But the science shows us more and more there's certain types of research you can't do in a focus group, or you're just getting lied to. And it's not that people are meaning to, but there's certain biases that you cannot focus group through. You're not going to get the truth. It's just how we're wired. And so we need to approach that with different non-conscious research methodologies in order to get the accurate answers from which we then design and create campaigns. And then the other side of that, which is my biggest passion, is keynote speaking and training. We have clients from Novartis Pharmaceuticals to Allstate Insurance and Blue Cross Blue Shields and Transamerica, a huge range of companies that we help by, first and foremost, training their teams on how to engage from this frequency of understanding, how to create comms, how to market and advertise and everything from that orientation, but also then how to communicate as a team and lead, and all of the different ways that, communication is core to everything.
Yeah, and it's probably more helpful for them, not only more interesting. Like some of this marketing stuff I'm seeing, it's just I'm, cognitively fatigued by my own industry. It's like boring stuff, and I love this science-based approach because it feels real. Science is real. But let me ask you one last question before we get into, even more personal or interesting things is, how do you, okay. So we all know that in PR, it's hard to measure results, right? Because I can't, so what I do for work, like I'm not selling $5 bracelets. Okay. So I can't track the sales very well because we're helping our clients sell a lot of B2B. And so they're high, sales prices, that long relationships. Mm-hmm. So even just tracking in that way is difficult to prove, our results. But when you're adding in science and behavior, not even changes, but changes in perceptions, how do you track and measure those results?
Great question. So a few different answers to that. First of all is measurement is a massive passion of mine. That's very analytical and loving the science. Also really love and appreciate that. But my business is the same issue as yours. We work with very large businesses, very large brands or countries. One of the campaigns that we were measuring is how to change the United States perception of Rwanda post-genocide, and evolving that messaging with articles in The Economist and Time Magazine. And, how do you measure that? It's not as simple as, clicks. And so a two-part answer. First is, you didn't even know this, but we are actually in the final stages about to publish on volumepr.com the definitive guide to marketing measurement. It is the 26 ways that we view the entire universe of measuring marketing effectiveness, including what is the future of that and how behavioral methods are incorporated. So probably by the time this goes live or near and around there, you'll be able to find that on volumepr.com.
Okay. And we'll share it with everyone too. That will be helpful for all of us.
Absolutely. Happy to share that. And in there, we talk about AMEC. If you're not familiar with AMEC, AMEC, and a communications professional, they're a group you need to know about. They're the International Standards Organization for measuring the effectiveness of communication. So this is who the global agencies are, members of this organization, and ascribe to what they call the Barcelona Principles, which is how we measure PR and comms effectiveness. And if you really dig into the Barcelona Principles beyond their core, I think it's 7 or 8 tenets, what you see in the material is it's all about measuring a change in attitude, perception, and behavior. So I think the simplest first step for all of us when we're thinking about measurement, that guide will give you all the nuts and bolty ways to do it. But where I want us to consider and evolving to is when first beginning a comms campaign, creating a message, any form of communication, is how do I want to influence and evolve attitude, perception, and behavior? And even just thinking about that, and first of all, involving yourself in the process that is what you're doing. You're not just broadcasting a message. Every time you speak to someone, you're engaging them from this frequency of understanding, either to create confusion or to create comprehension. It's just about whether or not you participate in the process consciously. And so the first thing from that measurement perspective to do is to recognize that's what we want to affect. And then how do we do those? Of course, they're far less tangible, but there are benchmarks we can set at the beginning with surveying, research, even non-conscious, what we call implicit and explicit association testing. Sounds complicated. What it really is, though, is showing a control group a series of images and words in such a rapid form, and they have to pick and choose various things, that the non-conscious mind is what you're getting a response from rather than just the conscious mind. So there's ways to set benchmarks with those types of tests that you then do with your group, again, over a period of time to see how perceptions, attitudes, behaviors, and things are evolving. It is nowhere near as fuzzy of a field as it used to be. It is sophisticated and not necessarily as inexpensive as a Survey Monkey. So companies, need to think about that if they want to lean into having the specificity. We find a lot of companies benefit from it tremendously without ever bothering to go to the level of doing all of the non-conscious testing to really get specific metrics about how much behavior, perception, and attitude have evolved.
Okay. Well, and that's all very important because I learned from you, and maybe you said this, but I also know this from your past work is I think you said, was it 95% of our decisions are made from our unconscious brain? Is that?
That's right. 95 to 99%, depending on which neuroscientist you want to quote, of our decisions are made in our non-conscious mind. But when you think about everything you and I have really been taught about how to be an effective communicator, it's all in regards to how we effectively engage the conscious mind, because that's all we've really known about. But if the conscious mind is making 1 to 4% of your decisions, yes, we should involve it, but it should hardly be the only party that we are paying attention to. That non-conscious mind is there. And if we use strategies that appeal to it, we are far more effective.
Yeah. So then how did you speak to your unconscious mind recently when you used this kind of framework on yourself?
That's such a big topic. So you got to interrupt me if I keep going for too long.
No, please. We love big topics here. So that's what we're all interested in. So, I mean, we're interested in all the science and stuff too, but I'm just saying, I think when we can use a personal story, that is what is going to stick with people and relate to them. So yeah, just tell us your recent story.
Absolutely. So in 2019, my business best friend and my unofficial business partner, we each owned our own PR agencies, but we ran them side by side from day one. She died unexpectedly. She was at the height of her career, the picture of health. And one night after speaking at a conference in a city where she had really bad allergies, in the middle of the night, she got up to take a Benadryl and she accidentally took an Ambien, and it cost her life.
It's so sad. Yeah. So scary.
And that just, that stopped everything for me for a moment, a really big moment. I was also going through some things in my marriage and some issues and things in that way. And it caused me to hit a bottom where I had to make some radical changes. And so I started doing some healing things, some other work on myself and learning about some various things. But ultimately, it put me on a path where I really started to prioritize speaking to myself in this science. And I realized how nasty I was being in my unconscious to myself. Okay, very, very critical. We all have that inner critic, and my inner critic was, a super boss CEO that was really, really good at their job and being really loud and really bossy. And, I, through a series of things related to using, other forms of support and some other knowledge and whatnot. But then most of all, too, really changing my inner dialogue. I learned how to use this science to stop that self-critic from beating me up all day and instead helping me get on a healthier path. And then the pandemic happened, and, we all know how much that arrested our lives and our homes. And my family was already going through some really difficult things. So at the end of 2020, I became a 100% full-time single mother, and my health was also in grave crisis. I have an autoimmune disease that I've had for 20 years called Hashimoto's. It affects my thyroid. And at the end of 2020, it was no longer responding to medication. I had been locked up super tight all year because I have this autoimmune disease. I don't know what'll happen if I get sick. And so I had put together, though, so much and been using the mind science to change how I was talking to myself that I was ready to do some harder things. And so at the beginning of 21, after having my husband, removed from our home, being alone with my children and creating a safe space for us there, I began a new way of eating, some of the different food science that I had learned, but that I didn't want to do because it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I could do it now because I wasn't beating myself up all the time. And I was practicing this radical self-kindness with my non-conscious. And I started the diet January 2021, and 8 months later, I had lost 115 pounds without exercising a single.
It's amazing, by the way. 8 months later, wow.
115 pounds. And I have, just for context, friends, I have been what the horrible word doctors use, morbidly obese, my entire life. I was obese as a child. I've always been significantly overweight, close to 300 pounds. So I didn't know that anything else was even humanly possible. And no one in my circle did either. So as I was losing so quickly, my friends started to ask me, what are you doing? How in the world are you doing this? And so I made a simple little Facebook group as a bit of a diary to just post my recipes and how I was talking to myself different, what books I was reading, what practices I was implementing. I followed a kind of eating called circadian rhythm eating. It's a form of fasting where you always stop at 7 p.m. and, chronicling and realizing, wow, if I eat at 7:15 at night, I gain weight. And, sharing this with my group and all of us kind of learning together. And so now, fast forward to today, and I have an organization and a group called Hurt, Eat, Heal. As I realize what I'm really been doing all in this process is approaching how I hurt, approaching how I eat, and then how I therefore heal differently. And that's really been the centerpiece of my life through the last couple of years. And all of it is based off of, first and foremost, changing my self-talk based on this frequency of understanding.
I love it. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I'm so proud of you and happy for you. And I think those big changes come so the big changes, it sounds like the big change is losing 115 pounds, but no, not really. It's the self-talk, which is huge because it's not only how we were raised, but how we raised ourselves, right? Like how we spoke to ourselves as kids and into adults. And I've heard, I think even on Glennon Doyle's podcast, what's that called? I'll remember in a minute. But, a lot of people say this, would you talk to your best friend that way? Or would you talk to your child that way? The way we talk to ourselves is terrible. And I am my own worst boss. Like I am a mean boss to myself. And you wouldn't know, ask any employee, they'd say, oh no, she's wonderful. Well, I mean, I've been working on it. I'm not that bad anymore, but I'm I'm not the best, boss to myself. And that comes not just in work, but personally, like, oh, why are you always late? Or why are you doing this? And I never follow through on some of my eating plans either. Just because, and partially now I'm just rambling. I wonder, it's like unconsciously, are we trying not to practice self-care? Because guess what? Self-care is not about getting massages and getting your nails done. It's about taking time for yourself to cook a meal or put yourself to bed early or these kind of things anyway.
Exactly. That brings up a couple different thoughts for me of, when talking to folks about how do we first change that's really where it starts of the first step in changing how you think about how you talk to yourself is, would you if you were in a room with your best friend, would you let your best friend openly be talked to by a stranger that way? What would you do if you and your best friend were sitting side by side and some random dude comes in the room and started to talk to your best friend the way that you're talking to yourself in your head right now, what would you do? Because what I do, I get angry. I stand up and I scream, how dare you? Who the hell do you think you are that you would talk to him that way? We can get out of here. There is no space to speak to them that way. And first of all, got a little angry of that's not allowed. That is not okay. And first see, okay, it isn't okay. And then what do I want to do to change it? Because staying angry at that inner critic is not what makes it change. But I think that we need to get a little bit upset with the fact that it's so out of control. And it probably does need a bit of a talking to and some work to start to then rein in that critic and learn how to replace that dialogue with different words that are far more positive.
Yeah. And then it's also like just redirecting a toddler, because we're constantly, even if the words aren't that bad, after a while, maybe you can, put a stop to really bad self-talk, but there's always some of that nagging of ourselves, and just redirecting and just taking a minute possibly to pause and think about whatever it is that you're trying to reach for, whether it's bad food, too much alcohol, whatever, and then pausing, redirecting, and choosing something more healthy. And so on your Facebook group, what is that group?
It's Hurt, Eat, Heal.
And that's on Facebook as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if you go to hurteatheal.com, there is a link on the page to the Facebook group. It's private, but anyone can join. And it's just behind that area there where we have everything posted right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's so exciting. And so do you feel like this is going to be a long journey for you to continue to eat this way and also talk this way to yourself?
Definitely. The talking this way, it is a lifelong process of improving it. Just as you were even just saying, you still catch yourself every day. We still have things that we do every day we're not proud of. And the knee-jerk reaction is to criticize ourselves as opposed to voice it in the how am I going to improve this? What change do I need to make around this, rather than a criticism? And I was doing it this morning. I yelled at my son. I have two little boys. They're 10 and 6. And I yelled at my 10-year-old so out of line this morning what I did. And my knee-jerk reaction is to get mad at myself and like, oh, you're such a bad mom. You're such a bad mom. But sitting in front of me right now is my beautiful stationery that I bought for work. I'm going to get emotional, Amy. My beautiful stationery.
That's okay. We can do that.
And I decided, because I'm talking nice to myself and say, you are doing better, Elizabeth. You're doing better in every part. My brain then said, what would we really be doing if I had yelled at Amy? What would I be doing? Well, I would be getting out my very best stationery and writing her an apology note. And so that's what I'm doing today. Is I got my fanciest stationery, and I am writing my son an apology and telling him what I did wrong. And like, imagine what a different action that is that I had the concept to do only because I wasn't self-flagellating over what a horrible mom I am. I mean, I did that for a second, but then I quickly shifted it to, I am doing the very best I can. So if I'm doing the very best I can, what does that mean? Well, it means I'm going to own my mistake, and I'm going to own it in a very elegant way.
And kids know we're all human. I mean, they're human too. And seeing a mom admit that they're wrong is better than just being perfect all the time, because we're not perfect. And then also just offering an apology that doesn't have any request back to the apology. It's like a real apology, which kids don't hear, because they're kids. So we know better, but that's not always true. So good. That's awesome. Yeah. So how has this new change affected kind of, your priorities and Missy's death? How's that changed what how you go about your day and your priorities with your business and everything else?
Yeah, a few different things. Volume PR is my first child, will always be central and important, and is my lead business, and where I get up thrilled every day to be supporting our clients and helping the brands and the folks that we're working with there so much, and love that side of things. But I'm also really enjoying, I think, creating some balance in doing a lot more keynote speaking and training around the concepts of how to engage from the frequency of understanding. And now too, how do we use that to help ourselves go through the process of hurting and eating and healing, and what does that look like in self-talk and in many other ways. So as you and I have met at many conferences. I've been speaking at conferences on communication and technology, those types of leadership trends, and absolutely want to continue that. Being on a keynote stage is actually my favorite place in the world to be. It's so fun to share this information with people because it changes them so much. But I also, Amy, really want to build more of the business where the times where we go into a company and fully train them on this method of communication, train their marketing, comms, and leaders teams, so then they make it their own and their whole business process evolves and changes because they have that knowledge. I don't know if you're ever on Clutch, the B2B website comparison. Mm-hmm. Our client Woodman Life left us rather hilarious, in my opinion, review on Clutch. They're a company that we train in this way, where we go in and we teach everyone in the company how to understand, or in comms in the company, how to understand this method of engagement to use it themselves. And it's just, that really is what lights me up the most, is giving the information to others so then they create the change in their company or in themselves, in ways that they've never been able to do before. And it's faster, and it might sound like it's hard. We're talking science and all of these things, but it's your own personal brain. You're learning how to understand yourself. And what cooler topic is there than how you make decisions and how you think, and then understanding that in the context of how you speak to other people. And so that's really where I see a balance, still, loving supporting companies and doing things for them via volume, but also really training and helping the next generation of communicators embrace and embody this skill through Engagement Science Lab.
Yay, I love it. Yeah, because you can only do so much. One company, one person, one team can only do so much. So if you extend the knowledge outward, is very giving and will help them, in their careers, or help the company excel if they have that knowledge. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was so good to hear, all of this, and we'll definitely be in touch because there's so much, to learn, especially as science evolves. We'll want to be talking with you about how to evolve our communications along the way.
I would love to, Amy. We have a lot of exciting things coming up this year, so let's absolutely keep in touch.
Okay, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.